it's like going back to inclusion and the importance of DE&I in an organisation. It's one thing for someone to talk about it and to say this is really important, but you will only judge it based on what you experience. And that old adage, people don't leave an employer, they leave a leader. And so to me, much of this comes back down to how we as leaders lead.
Hi, my name is Nadia Nagamutu, business psychologist, coach, speaker, and founder of Avenir Consulting, which creates organisational growth and success via inclusion and diversity. We've been discussing the benefits that diversity brings to companies' bottom line performance for decades with more and more evidence. But there are so many questions organisations still have about how to achieve it. How do you create a culture where people feel valued for their uniqueness and the qualities they bring? I believe it's crucial to the future success and sustainability of every organisation that they find the answer to this question to make sure that each employee is not only supported but also appreciated. With this podcast, I aim to get some of the key challenges to creating inclusive workplaces out in the open and start uncovering the solutions to embracing a culture that cares for everyone. I'm going to be having conversations with some of the most inspiring people in different countries and across industries who are pushing the boundaries on inclusion and diversity in the workplace, from topics such as parenting in the workplace, ethnicity, age, gender, mental health, and all things inclusion. I want to create a movement to change society through sharing life experiences and creating more empathy and connection. Why care? I believe that once we have organisations and societies that accept and value everyone for who they are, we become healthier, happier, and better in our roles, both inside and outside work. Hello, and welcome to episode 18 of my Why Care podcast. My name is Nadia Nagamutu, and I am your host. In this episode, I'm absolutely honoured to speak to the incredible Emma Codd, Global Inclusion Leader for professional services firm Deloitte. Emma is leading on Deloitte's Global Inclusion Strategy, and she's led the organisation's award-winning culture change programme, Respect and Inclusion. She has championed diversity and inclusion over many years, both within her own organisation and through external bodies such as the Leaders as Change Agents Lead the Change Board. Emma is also an advocate for workplace mental health and has helped to establish the global business collaboration on better workplace mental health, of which Deloitte is a founding partner. The number of research reports and impactful campaigns that have Emma's name against them are too many to mention. But one thing I know is that they're all creating powerful, new and much needed conversations in the world. We cover a breadth of DEI topics, including women's experiences in the workplace during the pandemic, the deteriorating state and stigma of mental health, the challenges of hybrid working, millennials, and inclusive leadership. Enjoy. Emma, it's fantastic to have you on the Why Care podcast and fantastic to see you again. Our paths have crossed so many times in various points in our life, so I'm lovely to see you.
And you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I'm a bit overwhelmed, to be honest, in talking to you because there are so many places we can take this conversation. And when I was obviously stalking you as a result of knowing that I needed to speak to you, I thought, gosh, where do we start? And I think really, if we could just start maybe at the point of just understanding why diversity, equity, inclusion, why did you choose that as a career path?
Thanks, Nadia. There is quite a lot we could cover, but that's because I think I'm a fixer and a problem solver. And actually, I never chose DE&I as a career path. It was actually thanks to an amazing sponsor I had that I ended up doing this work. So history-wise, which I will not bore you endlessly with my career, but I actually graduated from university, went into work and actually became a researcher for a corporate investigation and risk consultancy. And that was my passion and my career. So that's what I really wanted to do, is basically helping clients, working with them to make sure that they mitigated any risks associated with investing in new markets or all of those sort of things. And then I joined Deloitte in 97 with the intent of only ever staying there 3 years. And that was as a senior manager. And then the rest is history. So I became a partner in early 2000s. And then in 2013, our then CEO, David Sproul, I got a call from his PA saying, can you come and see David? He'd like to talk to you. I, being me, instantly, for some strange reason, thought I was being fired. I have no idea why.
I thought you were going to say that.
No, I genuinely thought I was being fired. And there was no rationale for that. I was actually quite a high performer and doing really well, but the usual sort of imposter syndrome and everything else. And I'm normally glasses half full, but on this particular day, I clearly was glasses half empty. And went to see him and he said, I'd like you to join my executive. So the executive in Deloitte is effectively like a corporate board. So at that stage, it was around 14 people who basically ran the firm. And he said, I'd like you to become my managing partner for talent. Now, I had no background in HR, no background in D&I. My only experience had been that I'd been sponsoring partner of our women's network for about 6 years. Prior to that, it was established by a fellow partner, Sharon Thorne. She established a load of networks when she was managing partner for talent. She's actually a real sponsor of mine as well. So I'd done that. And I just liked people, and my team was diverse, was very engaged. So that's how I fell into it. Now, the talent role is far wider than D&I. The talent role was really everything for people in our organisation. And the organisation in the UK at that stage was about 18,000 people spread across the United Kingdom. And we do all the usual stuff you'd expect professional services to do. And for me, one of the critical things that we needed to sort out actually was gender balance. And we had a real challenge around that. And David was well aware of that. I think that's why he put me in the role. And so that's where the passion started. That was listening to our people. It was looking at data. It was working out where our challenges were. And then effectively embarking on what became a big culture change program, along with, tearing up a lot of the ways we had done things, being willing to do that with his support. And then my current role now, so that role came to an end when David's leadership term came to an end. Back in 2019, we do fixed terms, basically. And I was just privileged to be given a new role, which was global inclusion leader. So I now work very closely with the global organization's leadership, and I'm really responsible for our D&I global strategy. So that's 160 countries around the world, 320,000 plus people with a lot to do. So where does the passion also come from? Well, because I've spent a lot of my career being in a minority. I've experienced all sorts of things as I've come up through my various workplaces, and I just wanted to do something to change that. It sounds very corny, but I don't want my children I have 2 daughters who are 12. We often talk about experiences at work, and they're getting to that age now where they want to understand more and don't want them to have unnecessary, ridiculous challenges that just should not be there today. So that's where the passion comes from. I think I'm at heart a fixer and a problem solver, and it is a problem that needs solving.
It is, and it's still a problem. So I'm interested in this latest report that Deloitte's just released earlier this year. So the Women at Work report. Can you tell me just how this journey, it seems, how the work you've been doing even 10 years ago, 15 years ago in the space of gender inclusion, how has it evolved? And what does this latest report tell us?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. I have a personal view on gender balance and lack of progress. I am a fan of gender pay gap reporting. I think that was a good idea. It's a blunt instrument and it will take a long time to fix some of the challenges we have. I think from my perspective, where I always came from on this, from when I started my managing partner of talent role, was that really this was about everyday culture. This was about what we experience. That yes, it was also about the way we make decisions as an organization. It was, that whole thing about why do we need promotion panels? Why do we need to put somebody in front of a panel of however many people that don't know them, that may not be particularly diverse? Why do we need to do that? So there were processes that we needed to challenge and look at, things that we'd just always done because they seemed like the right thing to do that may not be the best thing to do from a D&I perspective. But to me, the fundamental was our everyday experiences, because you can have an organization that says one thing, it can have all the best policies in the world, but whether people avail themselves of that. And it was like when we tackled what we call agile working, but flexible working, back in 2014, that was a massive, massive issue for us. There were 2 primary reasons that women were leaving our organization. The first one was work-life balance. The second one was culture. And the reality was it was all culture, because we had policies. We had the same policies everyone else would have. The reality was people didn't feel that they could avail themselves of those policies because they thought they'd be judged. They thought that they'd have to do the walk of shame 5 o'clock in the evening and that people would look upon them in not necessarily such a positive way. There'd be those throwaway comments, oh, you've come in today, have you? Those sorts of things that meant that people just thought, well, why would I do this? I might as well just go somewhere else where maybe I will be more accepted or drop out of the workplace completely. And that whole everyday culture became this real thing for David and I. And we sort of rebadged this as respect and inclusion. We made it all about respect for others. Now, translating that on into my current role and the report, one of the things that we really wanted to do, and this report actually, we first started talking about it before the pandemic. We wanted to do a piece of research. We wanted to try and show that actually the things that were really challenging to underrepresented minorities were actually the everyday cultural aspect. So I think lots of people have gone down the road of training in unconscious bias, all sorts of things, but actually we all know that that's not necessarily as impactful as we would like it to be. So the whole purpose of this report was really to ask women, because it's about women, do it through an intersectional lens. So we looked at experience for women of colour and LGBT plus women as well. We wanted to have a global look. So it was 10 countries around the world. We asked 5,000 women who are in the workplace today. Well, actually, some of them probably aren't, given some of the responses we got. But basically, we wanted to ask them about their everyday experience. And so that included questions around support you felt you had, with judgments that you felt you'd been given if you wanted to work in a particular way, and really importantly included non-inclusive behaviours. So typically microaggressions. And then the pandemic. So we wanted to do this whole research study. It was less around policies, because most employers have these policies. We wanted to know, do you take them up? If not, why not? What's the everyday experience you have from your leader? What about those around you? And then the pandemic happened. So we paused that piece of research for a bit. We did a pulse survey in the meantime, where we spoke to around 500 women. Actually, the pulse survey results are very similar to these results, and they're depressing. And what we did from this Women at Work research was we basically decided to knit in questions around that we could compare before the pandemic and during the pandemic. And the findings are actually, they're not surprising, because look, I am lucky. I'm a leader of a really supportive workplace. I would not be anywhere else. Everything about my organisation, I have huge respect for everything that we do, but even I struggled. And I always used to say that I was just about making it all work okay before the pandemic. And then I went to basically what felt like barely hanging on by a thread. And that was due to circumstances in my life at home, and then all the stuff. And so this research, some of the findings that are so shocking. So you have the perfect storm of women having more responsibility, like me, in the home. So my entire support network pretty much fell away on day one of the pandemic. And at the same time, workload has massively increased as well. And one of the impacts of that is that women's optimism has dramatically decreased. And worryingly, around a quarter of the women that we spoke to said that they were thinking of dropping out of the workforce entirely. And then 50% said, I'm actually probably going to change career in the next 2 years. So these are all these amazing women that we've invested in, that because of what they've gone through, basically just saying, look, I can't do this. And why can't they do it? Well, because the impact on their mental health has been catastrophic. So mental health and well-being, that was one of the largest drops we saw pre and during pandemic. So 35 percentage point drop in those women that said their health and well-being was good or very good. And then it nosedived. And then the knock-on effect on that is motivation. You've got women saying, look, I feel overwhelmed. I feel judged on presenteeism, the number of hours I'm online. And then all of those things, my employer hasn't supported me enough. And then finally, you've got those non-inclusive behaviours. And you would assume that because someone was in a virtual workplace, that mainly in a virtual workplace, that wouldn't happen. Well, forget it, because over 50% of the women that we spoke to said in the last year, yes, they had experienced non-inclusive behaviours. And that was worse for women of colour and worse for LGBT plus women. And so you're sort of battling with this world, that's this stuff that's going on. You've got increased workload, you've got increased home responsibilities, and then you've got people making comments or doing things that basically undermine and have adverse impact.
Have you got examples of that?
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to understand, through a virtual setting, is it that they're not invited to meetings?
It's that. It's exclusion. It's demeaning comments. And it's those throwaway comments. So to give you an example, experiences, they range from being addressed in an unprofessional, disrespectful way, being belittled by senior comments. So those throwaway comments that are intended often. Now, often microaggressions are unintentional due to a lack of education, a lack of awareness. But it's those throwaway comments that just make you feel rubbish, and they typically are in front of other people. unwanted comments or jokes of a sexual nature, disparaging, belittling comments about gender. And then for some who are physically present, there was unwanted physical contact. And the really worrying thing is that most of the women that we spoke to, so over 2/3, did not report those behaviours. And then when we asked them why they didn't report them, top reason was, well, why would I? Because it will adversely impact my career. The second two reasons were all around, well, it doesn't feel big or serious enough, or it won't be taken seriously, which to me speaks to culture. So it's now there was hope from this report. So the report did find a small number of companies, 4% of the women we spoke to worked for companies that we've called gender equality leaders, really amazing businesses. And each of those women that work for those gender equality leaders, they are all more committed, more engaged. They all believe their career is where it should be. They're very happy. They feel developed. They feel invested in. And interestingly, when we looked at what do those companies have in common based on what the women told us, it's a mix of deeply embedded characteristics, but one of the most significant ones is an inclusive culture where people actually walk the talk. So it isn't just someone senior saying, yes, this is important, but actually the environment, the culture all makes people believe, yes, this is important. So the report was somewhat depressing. It told us a very stark picture, and you've obviously got the great resignation that's going on at the moment.
I'm interested in that because one of the things that I was reading around the great resignation is that people who may have been subject to microaggressions or subtle acts of exclusion in the workplace physically are not wanting necessarily to go back to the office, to go back to that environment, that they felt safer in the virtual context. They felt safer working from home. So actually, when organisations have said, right, no, we're all back to the office, actually, a lot of people have gone, that's not a space I want to be in because I wasn't in a good place before the pandemic. I'm in a better place now. So I'm interested because actually what you've found then is that microaggressions, subtle acts of exclusion have been present virtually. And another reason for the great resignation is that actually people are just saying, no, I can't take this at all. Virtually in the office, neither. This isn't for me. I need to step away from the workforce entirely. That's really worrying.
It is. And I think, look, I'm not a psychologist. I do a lot of work around mental health, but we've all gone through 18 months that hopefully we will never go through again. Many people have lost loved ones, and the tragedy and actually the stress and the anxiety. I mean, I remember early stage of the pandemic, I couldn't watch the news. I was so worried. So my husband was my news filter. He was totally fine and happy to watch it. He was data obsessed. So he was looking at it, but I couldn't watch it because I was so scared and frightened. And I am not a scared and frightened person. So I think it changed all of us. And then I think it causes you to reevaluate. If I was at an earlier stage in my career, if I didn't really love what I do, and if I didn't really love the people I worked with and the culture that I work within, I would probably be one of those women that would be sitting there thinking, do you know what? I just don't want to do this. And I think it's things like the long hours culture. It's our well-being. It's the whole issue around mental health at the moment is actually depressing because we've talked about mental health consistently for 18 months. Lots of people, CEOs have been talking about it, but stigma still exists. And so there are people making decisions, basically thinking, well, I can't share how I feel. I don't feel I can. I think I'll be judged if I do so. Therefore, actually, I'm going to think about a different life. And you have women dropping out of the workforce entirely. You have women who are retraining. I think it's been a trigger. And then I think you've got the challenge of what we're going back into, hybrid working. And hybrid working, I always say, it's potentially the most exciting thing. I mean, I battled for years to change the culture around agile working.
Well, a lot of us, as so many organisations, in fact, the pandemic gave this opportunity,
exactly,
hasn't it, to say, well, it can work. All of this time we've been facing this brick wall going, no, can't do that, can't do it remotely. And then all of a sudden it's forced organisations to shift and adapt.
I agree. And so now we're all going back into the new normal. I mean, at the moment, because my childcare fell away, I've just managed to find somebody that can come back in. I'm now working out, right, how many days will I go in? So I'm going to go in a couple of days. I'm actually going into the office tomorrow. I'm very excited about it. And that's going to work for me. But I think there's a lot of people that are concerned, when should I go in? When's the right time? What about those water cooler moments? What about how will I be judged? So I think this is the time that we need such strong people leadership. We need to lead in a different way where we were all the same. So where we were all remote, it's almost like a base setter. So we're all there. We all have chaos going on behind us. We all have the dogs barking, the Amazon deliveries, all of that stuff. So that was the great leveler. Now we're going into a period where we could inadvertently end up with a layer of exclusion where you have people that don't feel comfortable. So to your point, people that are scared, don't want to come in, people that can't because their life has changed. They have caring responsibilities. And I think as businesses, it's just one to really be careful about and manage. And then you've got the inclusive behaviours, your point around the non-inclusive behaviours. The sad thing is they're happening whether you're in person or you're not in person, as we've seen. And people can still feel excluded, even if there is not a word or an action, but based on the fact that everyone else in the team is in and they're at home.
This is a fascinating conversation because it's so current. It feels that leaders have had to work really hard. It's been a very steep learning curve over the last 2 years, right? So they were leading in a certain way, and then all of a sudden they had to lead a completely remote team and dispersed team. And now we're asking leaders to adapt again, to know how to lead effectively a team that is half present, half not, and continually shifting around and moving. And how do we support leaders with this new challenge, I suppose, that they're facing?
That's, again, a really good question. And it's so difficult because we do a lot of leadership development at Deloitte. It's a big thing for us. And we have the amazing Deloitte University where you get to go and it's incredible. So a huge investment in that. I think it's getting back to a human form of leadership where we've had this leveler. And then if you think about it from a mental health perspective, for example, it's how do you spot the signs when someone is struggling? And how do you do that sort of, are you okay? But how do you ask that? Well, it's through knowing somebody. It's through taking the time to understand their concerns and from them trusting you to be able to open up that way. I'm not sure that's ever changed. That's the way I've always led. So I've always wanted to know people that work in my team. I've always wanted to understand as much as they ever want to share with me where their concerns are, any challenges they have, and actually reach an understanding of how we're going to work. And that's what's really needed now. And so it's leading with empathy, leading with authenticity. I am very open and I will share with my team when I've had a challenge because I'm human and we all have them. And then I'll hopefully be able to share the solution and that this is what worked for me. And so everybody realizes, well, if she's saying that, then it's actually okay for me to say that. Now, there are also hints and tips. We did a lot of this at the start of the pandemic around virtual working, and we produced really useful sort of one-pagers about think about this. And it's now needs to be the same for when we virtually work. And I think there are people that come up with great ideas that then go horribly wrong. So I have a colleague that decided that for a particular meeting where some were going to be virtual, some in person, that those in person would be on their laptops. So everyone. But then what you don't realize is that you can't do that when you're all in the same room. There's a real problem with the sound.
Sure.
There's a problem. And so figuring out, and I think much of it is down to when we were all in a room together, the quietest person in the room, it's making sure that they are given an opportunity, making sure everyone is included, making sure there's an agenda. So when you're having a meeting, make sure somebody knows what the meeting's about so they feel able, if they want to prepare. So I think it's just brought that need out more. But I do worry from a mental health perspective where we are, as we know, many people have come out of this pandemic having never experienced mental health before and are now experiencing it. And
shocking, actually. I speak to so many people that have said how the pandemic has affected them from a mental health and their whole family. So as young people being so affected. And I'm interested actually because you wrote an article about a year ago now about millennials and Gen Z. And it being the number one priority from a mental health perspective to really focus particularly on those generations, those younger generations coming into the workplace. 1 year later, what's your latest thinking with regard specifically to this younger generation with mental health?
It's really interesting because we have updated data on that. So that was from our millennials survey in 2020, in which we just published some updated data from this year's millennials survey. And it's so interesting. Look, everyone in the workplace, look, I think generationally it's impacted everyone. I am by no means a millennial anyway.
Yeah, right, neither.
And I still have struggled. Having never struggled before, I have struggled in the last year and a half. I always worry that people think, oh, she's saying it's only millennials and Gen Z. No, it isn't. It's all of us. We've all gone through this.
But I think what's really interesting about your research, it's that intersectionality, isn't it? It's all well and good saying, yes, everyone will have suffered some form of mental health, potentially some form of mental health issues, but for different reasons. So
right.
You and I, for example, we're both mothers. We have certain caring responsibilities, but even that's not going to mean that we have some common ground in terms of why we suffer different types of mental health. It's very similar. So I like the fact that Deloitte has sort of just dug a little bit deeper into this particular group of people.
And yes, we do this amazing big millennials report and research every year. It's tens of thousands of millennials and Generation Zs or Gen Zs around the world. So last year was the first time we put mental health questions in there. We put them in before the pandemic because mental health became a global priority for us from an inclusion perspective. So it was just fortuitous that we had added them in. And the findings were, I think, as many people know, staggeringly high number of millennials and Generation Z say they feel stressed or anxious all the time. And many don't report when they do feel that, when they take time off, they don't give the real reason and not sharing with colleagues, all of those things, stressors, lots of different stressors, including work-life balance and including inability to be one's true self in the workplace, as well as family welfare and health and all those things, climate. Now, that this year, sadly, is not much different, apart from the fact you've got more people who say that the pandemic has caused them to suffer from stress and anxiety. So it's around the same numbers. It's around half of the many thousands we spoke to said, I feel stressed and anxious all or most of the time. Around half said, I feel increased stress because of the pandemic. Top stressors were, again, family welfare, health, job security with what we've gone through. And really depressingly, again, despite all the talk of mental health in the last year and a half, you've got a large number saying that when they have taken time off work for mental health reasons, they have given a totally different reason. You've got those that are feeling more stressed and anxious. They're typically not disclosing that to their employer. And then you've also got people that have never taken time off for stress and anxiety. When we asked them, would you give the real reason? Around half said, no, I wouldn't give the real reason. So you've got this challenge in that people are feeling more of this. We've had more talk about mental health than we probably ever had. And yet people are still experiencing stigma or perceiving there to be stigma within the workplace, because I have no doubt this is down to stigma. This is down to how you feel you'll be judged if you say, look, I'm really struggling and I need to help. And it basically means people won't get signposted to the help they need. It means businesses don't understand the cost to them and the impact. You've got presenteeism, which in this context is people turning up to work where they shouldn't be at work.
I'm trying to understand then, how is it that we're talking more about mental health and yet, because you would have thought that being more open about it and organisations having greater support from a mental health perspective would suggest that actually this is an organisation where it is okay for you to tell us. And we encourage you and want to support you. Why is it then that we're still getting this issue with people hovering and, with regards to their mental health issues?
I think there are two reasons. So I think societal stigma is very ingrained and very hard I think the workplace can change. So I do think that's a challenge. And then honestly, Nadia, I think a big part of it is you can have a leader saying all sorts of things, but if what you experience from your leader is totally different. So that classic thing that I often refer to, which is you get invited to an online yoga session or meditation session, which everyone joins in, and then you log off afterwards, you go into your email and you've got an email from your leader saying, I need this by then, I need this by then. No, please, no, thank you, no thought about what else you've got on. That to me is the issue. It's like going back to inclusion and the importance of DE&I in an organisation. It's one thing for someone to talk about it and to say this is really important, but you will only judge it based on what you experience. And that old adage, people don't leave an employer, they leave a leader. And so to me, much of this comes back down to how we as leaders lead. And most senior people can say all they want, but if you don't enable leaders to have a conversation, we've just introduced this or recently, a few months ago, introduced a global baseline on mental health in every country where we operate. So it's over 160 countries. And it's just recognizing that actually many of us haven't talked about this before. And so let's educate. Let's not just say, right, you must go out and talk about it. Let's educate so people understand. We have storytelling campaigns where so many of our people will share their stories. We will have resources. We have these how-to guides that we've prepared, which are out there globally for everyone to see, and they're amazing. And one of them is how to talk about mental health, because often you're scared to even open that conversation. And so we've decided that, look, we need to educate our leaders, we need to communicate, and then we need to measure. So there are a number of things that we're doing consistently, and our leaders are embracing this. And we have so many people saying, I wanted to know more about this, but I didn't know where to look. There's so much out there. And so we've sort of condensed it into, right, here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to understand. Here's some stories. This is real, but this is what we can all do. And it's been embraced. And so I think a lot of this is taking the time to educate and to talk to people and to enable them to ask that question, are you okay? And then to be able to respond accordingly when someone says, actually, no, I'm not okay.
Yeah. What you just said there, it seems to me, and just in summary of your role and what it does, it feels like it's very much around the education piece, but also getting people's stories out there, allowing people to hear different perspectives of how other people live their lives or what impacts them. And I say this just because of the amazing campaign that you led earlier this year. So there was the Can You See Me campaign, which it blew me away, to be honest, when I was watching these short but beautifully put together and impactful stories of different people with such an intersectional lens. You've spoken about intersectionality quite a bit today. Tell me a little bit more about that campaign and why it was important, you felt, to share these stories.
So the stories are an amalgam. So the characters are played by actors with lived experience. So Jackie is played by a trans woman, and that was really important to us. And they are an amalgam of a number of stories. And there were so many of these stories that we had gathered. And to me, it comes back to education. And respect and inclusion is a big global priority for us. It's the foundation of everything we're doing from a DE&I perspective. And we actually created the films for ourselves to have something that our people could watch and then have a conversation around. They could engage with. We know a lot of our clients are using them now as well. And we release them externally because actually we got so many of our people said, these are so incredible, we should be releasing them. And the purpose of them, from my perspective, I wanted people to understand the impact that our words and actions have on others. And you'll notice that all the way through the stories. It's all about the individual's experiences with Alejandro, and where he talks about, I can't tell you how many times I'm asked this. And it's each of those stories so important. We wanted people just to sit back and think, just for 2 or 3 minutes, to walk in somebody else's shoes, and then to go back and watch them again and think about what could have happened differently, what could have been done differently that would have changed things. It would have been positive. And we then, at the same time, we've created ways for people to have group conversations about this in a space where they feel they want to share. We're so proud of them. It's part of an ongoing campaign. So we have Can You See Me, Do You Hear Me, which was our Pride campaign in June. Again, storytelling for me has always been a big thing. I engage with stories. I love stories. I listen to stories. We all do. We don't, in my view, listen to this training, but we do engage on something like this where we can see somebody else's life. We can understand their experiences and understand what could have been different and what could have changed. So that will continue. So watch this space. We've got plans for more of these. And then the final point for me is intersectionality. I wanted these films to show things through an intersectional lens. As you said earlier, you and I are both women. It's that sort of chart that you see where you've got what you see above the surface, the visible.
The iceberg.
Exactly. And then what you see below, which is so much more that makes us who we are. And just because we may both identify in one way, it doesn't mean we're the same. And there may be common challenges we both have because of that. And so that was really important to us as well, was that we brought these stories out through an intersectional lens as well.
One of them was Katerina's story. That was the one that I watched a couple of times, actually. And because that had the intersectional lens, which isn't always touched upon, which is the socioeconomic background, so social mobility, and just that feeling of coming into an organisation where it's corporate, it's male dominated, and feeling like you're not justified or legitimate in being there because no one in your family has ever had a job like this before. And there was a microaggression or a subtle act of exclusion that was played out there where you only got this because of, you tick those boxes, you're female, you're an ethnic minority. Sort of, I don't know what grated me when I heard that, because it's like that thought that this is tokenism. And I'm curious, how do we overcome that when we're trying to create diversity and create an inclusive organisation, but to avoid the backlash of people feeling that it is just someone there because they tick those boxes?
It's a massive challenge. And what I've had comments made to me, and there were so many people that had comments like that. But for me, a part of this, again, it comes back to culture and it comes back to basic equality and everybody being an environment and having the processes in place where everyone can succeed. I think there will always be some people that will not change their views. And my view is that where you can't change them, you sort of wouldn't want them, frankly, anywhere within the organisation. But there will always be people like that. But equally, there will be people that really get this, that do see this as important. And it's educating. I mean, someone once said to me, you've got the sort of people that just get it instinctively. You've got people that can be persuaded, and then you've got a smaller layer of people that can't. And it's those people that can be persuaded, and it's bringing it back to a common sense approach. And then I also think it's allyship. I think we have had a real focus on allyship.
Yes, because you had the other campaign, didn't you?
Stand up, speak up. Yes, that was really important to me. And that was, again, there's a line in there, which I love, where if there's poison in the water, there's poison in the water. And that's what we need people to understand, is that this is about everybody. This is not about box ticking. This is not about tokenism. This is about a level playing field for all. It's about a culture where everyone can thrive. And it's about allyship. It's about people realizing that this is the right thing to do for various reasons. And it's down to all of us to take a stand. Where we see behavior that's not in keeping with our values, we need to call it out. Where we see a process that we think is disadvantaging, we need to call it out. We need to do something about it. And I think if you can get everybody to see that it is their responsibility, it's our responsibility as an organisation, I think there's progress. I think where it isn't tackled and where it's a CEO priority, I mean, it is in my organisation. It's very clearly a CEO priority, a global CEO priority and member firm CEO priority. It gets measured. What gets measured gets done, it gets reported on. And I think that if it gets woven in, rather than, oh, it's a program here, a program there, oh, and let's push some people into roles because we need to fill some numbers, there's so far from what it should be. So I think there's a series of things. Clear leadership is needed.
My goodness, Emma. So clearly a massive systemic role that you have, where you've managed to weave all of this in and create globally some incredible campaigns, mental health baseline, all of these wonderful videos that impact globally. I know why now you absolutely love your job. And I could carry on speaking to you about so many other things, and maybe there'll be a part 2 of the Why Care with Emma Codd in future. But for now, if anyone's interested in getting hold of you on social media.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, and I also, on my LinkedIn feed, I publish a lot of stuff, and there's links to the films. Everything we do, basically, that we push out goes out via my LinkedIn as well.
Brilliant. Well, everything that Emma and I have spoken about today is going to be available on the show notes page. Make sure that all of those websites and all the campaigns are going to be on there. So it's avenirconsultingservices.com under podcasts. Emma, I don't know what to say apart from a huge thank you for your time, for sharing all of the amazing work and everything that you're putting out there in the public domain, because it helps every single organisation, every single DEI practitioner. I, for one, can say how much I use the work that Deloitte puts out there in everything that I do with the organisations and the clients that I have. So I'm incredibly grateful and loved speaking to you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Nadia.
That concludes episode 18 of the Why Care podcast. I was so struck by the figures Emma quoted from her research around women dropping out of the workplace and the stigma associated with mental health. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch the videos related to her campaign, Stand Up, Speak Up, and Can You See Me? The links are in the show notes, together with the research reports Emma referred to. Do let Emma and I know what you thought of today's show. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram with the handle @Nadia and @Avenir Consulting Services. As always, I really appreciate your support of this podcast through leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening and spreading the word by sharing it with your friends and family. Huge thanks to Mauro Kenji for editing this podcast and John Rice for supporting with the show notes and getting it out there on social media.